Welcome to session 8. I do believe this is about halfway. I hope it's halfway through a good semester rather than halfway to the end of our misery. I trust if you were miserable, you would let me know, and I haven't heard of any misery yet. Either all of you have a great tolerance for pain, you enjoy pain, or we're on the right track. And based on the feedback that I haven't received, I choose to believe the latter. And I also hope that you'll let me know if that's not true. We will continue our discussion from the last session and wrap up our discussion of recruiting, selection, and hiring. This week, we will discuss making that all-important final decision. It's like we are deciding to get married. Well, actually, we decided to get married a long time ago before we started this whole process of hiring and selecting and recruiting. We are now deciding who we will get married to. Who is the lucky bride or groom? We will also discuss marketing our company to candidates to convince that lucky bride and groom that they are indeed lucky. We will briefly recap these first 8 sessions, and I will leave this topic with some parting thoughts as to its general importance to the organizational success. Staff well and prosper, staff poorly and struggle. You'll hear that again. The text wraps up its discussion as well, detailing how we incorporate assessments into the hiring process, and they also include a conclusion. Both include good information and warrant close study. I'll point out 2 quotes from the text that shed light on where we have been and where we are going. On page 237, the author states, when appropriately designed and deployed, staffing assessments substantially improve the accuracy of hiring decisions. That's why we spent these 8 weeks studying assessments. They make us better. We all need to make better hiring decisions, and the proper use of assessments facilitates that end. And they don't have to be expensive, and they don't have to take a great deal of time. But on the other hand, not using assessments or using them improperly can actually be harmful to the organization from a functional and a legal perspective. On page 238, the author states, quote, hiring decisions should be based on a person's potential and not on less relevant factors such as demographic background, socioeconomic status, or family name, and so on and so forth. The objective nature of assessments allows companies to more effectively place people into jobs where they are most likely to succeed, end quote. And this is where we are going. It's one thing to select the right person for the right job, but if we put them in the wrong environment or in an environment that doesn't reward or support their success, our quest for success may be a very long journey indeed. We hire people for their potential. Will our environment inhibit that potential or enable us and the new hire to reach and exceed that potential? I hope from these first 8 sessions you gain insight as to how the hiring and selection process works, which should also give you valuable insight as to how to compete within that system. I've said that before. The ensuing sessions will give you less insight and more knowledge as to how compensation and reward systems work in organizations. Insight is important for you to compete. Knowledge is important for you to thrive. So as we wrap this up, focus on what you can take away for your job search and career development. We've covered a lot of material and have a lot yet to cover. And I hope the trip so far has been worthwhile. Session 8. At the end of the last session, we were in the midst of a search for a middle-level management position. Once again, the example I discuss involves a fictional middle-level management position in really any size company. The process I use would also apply to lower, middle, and upper-level management and professional positions. Hourly positions would be less complex with fewer written assessments and less involved interviews, Nestle notwithstanding. Executive positions, on the other hand, may be a little more extensive, but generally the same in nature. Remember, we had reduced the number of viable candidates for our subject search down to 20. Obviously, we can bring everyone in for an interview, but that's a lot of people to coordinate, travel, facilitate, and schedule interviews, etc. That interview process may take several weeks. Therefore, we may wish to narrow the field down to 6 to 10 candidates for final consideration. How do we go from 20 to 6? Well, there's no single answer, but we know we must deploy some additional assessment tools to narrow the field. There are a lot of options available, as we mentioned, and which to choose depends on many factors detailed in the text. At this point, my preference has always been to start deploying phone or virtual interviews. These interviews would generally include HR and maybe someone representing the hiring department, not necessarily the hiring manager. I utilize a short phone or video interview because to this point, the contact with the candidates has largely been on paper through the resume, letters, emails, and other non-personal contacts. When the numbers get lower, it is good to start personalizing the process and put a face to a name. It is also important that the candidate place a face to the company, and HR can start the process of selling the company to these more desirable candidates. Remember, we are not the only game in town, and highly qualified candidates may be entertaining other opportunities. These interviews also give us an idea if additional assessments should be included to narrow the field even further. For example, the interviews may reveal that our final 10 candidates are very close in qualifications, and the decision of who to reject appears more difficult than first thought. At that point, we may want to add an assessment tool or deploy one we were saving for the finalists and deploy it sooner. Regardless, the reality is that we must decide who to keep and who to reject. I would like to backtrack for a moment to further discuss the marketing aspect of the selection process. Obviously, we are doing some marketing throughout the process, but we must make particular effort during the final stages. One caution: there is a tendency, particularly with the labor market as it is today, to believe that the candidates should be grateful that we are considering them for employment. There are way more applicants than jobs, so if someone leaves the pool because they are not convinced of the opportunity or the organization, there are plenty more where they came from. This is the same elitist and naive attitude that chooses to ignore employee concerns with the passing comment, "You are lucky to have a job, so stop complaining." It's an attitude that permeates management in some organizations and will not sustain success over the longer term. It does not value excellence, but assumes mediocre and good enough is all that is needed. One only has to scroll through history to find that it is all about the right person in the right time in the right job. Someone else with the right qualifications or the same qualifications would not necessarily have yielded the same positive results. So once again, we are looking for excellent candidates, not just acceptable candidates. Excellent candidates know they are excellent and don't accept opportunities just because they present themselves, but because they are sold on the opportunities. So how do we market our opportunities to these elite candidates? Just like you market to customers. Good organizations strive to make customers feel special. If you are using a headhunter, the marketing has been conducted all along the process. Marketing our company is one of the responsibilities of the headhunters. But there are many subtle things that an organization can do to treat the candidate special and present a professional front to the candidate. Put together an organizational, industry, and community packet for each candidate, particularly these finalists. This includes information about the organization, including bios of the key individuals with which the candidate will be interacting. It includes general information about the organization, the job, benefits, etc. It also includes pertinent information about the industry in which the organization competes, including present and future challenges. And perhaps the most important information is the community information. This highlights information about schools, entertainment, cultural activities, housing, etc. Remember, the candidates are likely also marketing this opportunity to family members. Put some ammunition in their hands to excite the family. More than one excellent candidate has been lost, not because of the job or company or opportunity, but because of the perceived weakness of the local school system or the family's perception of the community. I have encouraged top executives to write letters to candidates thanking them for their interest and extolling the virtues of the company and the opportunity. Anything that you can do to treat candidates special and put a personal image to the company will help to market the organization to the candidate. Candidates want to feel that they are special, and we, as an organization, must make the candidate believe that our organization is special as well. Mediocrity follows the crowd, but excellence stands out. Let's assume we have now reduced our viable candidates to 5 or 6 by deploying our assessment tools. As stated previously, there are many ways to structure this final portion of our selection process. I will give you a look at my typical and preferred process, but understand you will likely develop your own preferences. Regardless, we will invest much time, energy, and money into assessing candidates. First, we schedule each of these finalists for an interview session. I prefer to use the structured team interviews. The team part means that 3 to 5 individuals who interact with the subject position regularly and including HR will be on the interview team and either interview separately or as a group, and the text discusses the advantages of this. For the most part, I prefer interviewing as a group. The structured part means that each member of the team is responsible for asking specific questions as in any structured interview. The advantages of doing this as a group is twofold. First, those team members get to help structure the question and to have input into the process. Second, when the question is asked and answered, everyone has an opportunity to hear and see the same response. Team members may agree with the interpretation or disagree, but it becomes a point of discussion instead of an unsubstantiated fact or interpretation, as would be the case if they were interviewing privately and separately. One point of interest as to the composition of the interview team. Sometimes I include the hiring manager in the team, and on other occasions I have the hiring manager interview the candidate privately after the team interview. It really depends on the position and the hiring manager's skills and preferences. I usually allow time in the team structured interview for free flow questions in which the interviewers can probe deeper on questions they have previously asked or gain clarification about the candidate's background and experience as stated on the resume, or they can ask other questions they find useful. I also make sure that we allow for and encourage candidates to ask questions of the team members. I should also point out that I expect astute candidates to ask questions, and that's a lesson you can take back for your own interviews. It is important that all candidates are subjected to the same team composition and the same structured interview questions. I mentioned earlier that I find assessments very useful in guiding the structured interview questions. If an assessment identifies that an individual is defensive or self-centered, our questions may want to explore that further. Not by asking directly, are you defensive and self-centered? They just answered no. But by asking questions that may bring some of those characteristics out. If someone is defined as being risk-averse and a highly structured conformist, one question may be, tell me about a situation when you went against the grain or disagreed with a policy and decided not to follow it. In one such incident, I was interviewing a candidate for an executive position, and our soft data indicated that he was very self-confident and was very honest. He had been laid off from his previous position, which I probed during the interview. I found out that they didn't actually do away with his position, But there were two individuals in the position, and they did away with one of the people, which was him. I asked him about his accomplishments, and he rendered a very long list of exceptional performance and accomplishments in the job. I looked at him and said, if those are your accomplishments, and your old company chose to keep the other guy and let you go, perhaps we should be talking to him. He must be truly fantastic. Why would they let you go and keep him? I expected him to get rattled, but instead he calmly stated, that's a great question. Truthfully, I don't have a problem with them keeping him and letting me go. He was a great employee and equal to me. I'm good, but so was he. He had been with the company for many years, and I had only been with them for less than 5 years. I would have kept him too. But everything I told you is true. What an answer. It certainly confirmed his self-confidence and his honesty. He did great. However, my reaction would have been much different if he had ranted about the stupidity of his old employer and how they didn't appreciate his efforts. His self-confidence would have turned to arrogance, and his honesty would certainly be narrowly defined. Don't be afraid to ask direct and difficult questions in an interview. Your job is to seek out exceptional candidates and make a good, sound decision. You can't do that by beating around the bush. After the team's structured interview, the team meets briefly to summarize the interview and clarify interpretation. Notice, I didn't say agree on interpretations. This is not like the Nestle example or the assessment centers at RCA. Agreement is not necessary, and I'll explain that in just a moment. After the candidate has endured a structured team interview, they will interview with the hiring manager and others in the organization as appropriate. I generally include a tour of the facility, introducing the candidate to a number of employees along the way. I may even include meetings or briefings from others of interest, depending on what the candidate stated were concerns. If housing is an issue, I may schedule a brief meeting with a realtor or other community representative. At times, I even include a tour of the community, of course, depending on the size of the community, to introduce the candidate to the environment. That's all part of marketing. At the end of this, usually a day-long process, I dismiss the candidate with contact information and detail the time frame in which we will make a decision and explain how they will be notified of the decision. And this process is repeated for each finalist candidate. When all finalists have been interviewed, we have a great deal of data available on each candidate. As I indicated in the last session, most of the hard data is useless at this point. It's basically the same or similar for all candidates. They all have 4-year degrees in the appropriate fields. They all have the appropriate experience, etc. This means that soft data becomes the deciding factor. We are essentially predicting the potential of an individual to do an exceptional job within the confines of our company. Now, not only are we predicting the potential to perform exceptionally on the job, we are predicting that one will perform more exceptionally than the others. Put in those terms, this is not easy. Who makes this hiring decision? The hiring manager. Not an executive, not HR, not a team, but the hiring manager. They make the decision because they have to live with the results of the decision. And they should receive a lot of help, but they make that decision. To that purpose, after the interviews are completed, the interview team is called together and all give their opinion on each candidate. Although it is difficult to make the final decision, in most instances, the finalists are narrowed down further to 2 or 3 candidates at the most. This is where the decision becomes really difficult. The interview team does not reach consensus because it's not their decision. Once again, it is the decision of the hiring manager. Now, my job as the HR professional and a member of the interview team is to facilitate the meeting, always directing the information and input towards the hiring manager. However, there are 2 situations in which HR takes a more active role in guiding the process. If the hiring manager appears to be making the decision based on inappropriate information or opinions, I must step in and redirect. For example, if the hiring manager says, "This is a tough decision, but I'm going with candidate number 2 because he graduated from UNC and we need another UNC grad in the organization." Don't laugh, it happens. Or the hiring manager may say, "We really need a man in this position, so number 3 is the guy." Undesirable criteria such as this should not be discouraged. It should be forbidden. The other instance where HR must step in to facilitate more directly is when 1 or 2 interview team members are so adamantly opposed to the candidate that the hiring manager chooses that it would prevent that new hire from being successful. In this instance, and I've seen this happen as well, HR must continue the discussion and debate until those opposed agree that they can support the new hire, or the hiring manager becomes convinced that the choice is not valid. So we are down to 2 or 3 and the decision must be made. Here is where the weak decision makers show their true colors. Strong decision makers simply say, "I'm choosing candidate 2 because of this and this and this." Weak decision makers say, "Can we get more data?" Weak decision makers hope that more data will make the decision. Weak decision makers are not incapable of making a decision. They are incapable of living with the consequences of that decision, and that's an important distinction. As an HR professional, I discourage getting additional data unless there is a compelling reason. Such action just doesn't look good to the candidates and undermines the entire process. I once interviewed for a position in a medium-sized company and made about 6 regional trips to either interview or complete various tests and assessments. It seems that the decision came down to me and 1 other candidate as finalists for the job. When I received the call for the 7th interview, I declined and told them I was no longer interested, primarily due to their inability to make a decision. The other person got the job. About a month later, I received another call offering me the same position. You see, the person they hired quit after 2 weeks, presumably due to frustration with the culture. All the assessments in the world just generate data and is useless if the organization can't make a decision. Oh, by the way, I turned down that second offer as well. There was no amount of money that would entice me to work for such an indecisive organization. Let's go back to my examples from the last session to make another point. When the NCAA selection committee, same as our interview team, makes the final decision as to who to leave in and who to reject, what happens? Well, immediately after the decision, there's a selection show on ESPN where all of the teams are announced, including in which bracket they are placed. Just as immediately, people start second-guessing the selections. They second-guess who was included and who was excluded and why. They second-guess where the teams were sent to play and when and whom they play. It's ruthless. And I got to admit, I love it and I watch it every year. That is the uncertainty that causes weak decision makers to ask for more data. Somehow, the additional data may reveal the one true fact that makes the decision unequivocal and unquestionable. That piece of data never comes to the hiring manager or to the NCAA selection committee. And I always marvel at the end of the NCAA tourney when it's all over, all the naysayers extol the greatest tournament in modern day times. Now, I have felt that doubt and that uncertainty, but it must be overcome and a decision must be made and final. At various times, I have actually looked at the members of a contentious interview team after all of the arguing and after the decision has been made and said, everyone must understand that we lead this committee and everyone will support this new hire and drive and help them to success. That's our job, and standing in the way of success will not be tolerated. And do you know, people respond to such truth and clarity. Their job is facilitating success, not failure. And the HR job is to be the leader in the organization, particularly when facilitating good selection decisions. So once again, all on the interview team, regardless of whether it's contentious or not, must support the hiring decision. Back to our computer purchase example. When you finally make your selection and get the computer home, are you pleased with the result? Or do you always wonder about the feature you didn't buy? Have you ever had that feeling of buyer's remorse? Buyer's remorse is not a good thing when buying computers, but it is particularly distasteful when hiring. So we made our decision. What's next? We have two very important tasks to complete. First, we must make a job offer to the chosen one. Many organizations put that in the hands of HR, but I have always believed that if the hiring manager makes the decision, they should also make the offer. The offer dollar amount plus any additional items such as moving package, benefits, special considerations, etc. are communicated during the offer. In addition, the new hire is told that the offer is contingent upon passing a physical, passing a drug screen, or any other required action. HR generally puts together an offer packet which guides the hiring manager in rendering a telephone offer and also serves as a written documentation of the offer. An acceptance of the offer or a reasonable review or think time may be agreed to which the candidate makes a decision of acceptance. A packet is also compiled and sent to the candidate and should include the necessary paperwork to sign, a description and instructions of the onboarding process, community information, and items pertinent to the family. You know, at times I have also had flowers or some such gift sent to the home to welcome the family to our organizational family. Notice we are still marketing. When the offer is accepted, a mutually agreed upon start date is established. After the offer is rendered and accepted, we are free to contact the rejected candidates. This is normally accomplished by mail, but may be done by phone as well. We don't contact the rejected candidates until we are certain the chosen candidate will accept the position. If the chosen candidate rejects the offer, we reconvene the interview committee and make sure everyone finds the second candidate acceptable. The offer is made and accepted, and now how do we ensure that the new hire has a successful entry into our organization? It used to be called orientation, but in today's enlightened environment, we call it onboarding. Same stuff, different name. Actually, that's not completely true. Over the years, there has been a realization that transitioning people successfully is important. To that end, onboarding has become much more important and received greater attention. We have just gone through an extensive process to find an exceptional candidate. We have offered them a lot of money, and we've gone to great pains to market our company. The process then does not end when the offer is accepted. In truth, hasn't the process just begun? We may assume that this exceptional candidate, now employed, was employed or recently employed by someone. We stole them right out from under the desk. They may not have been dissatisfied, but they weren't fully satisfied either, or they wouldn't have entertained our offer. So how do we keep them from doing the same thing in the future to us, particularly in the near future? Onboarding enables a quicker, smoother transition so that the new hire becomes fully productive quicker. It also solidifies our marketing activities to ensure our internal brand to our new employee is strong. Beyond the onboarding time frame, maintaining a positive image among all employees is discussed in the compensation section of this course. However, maintaining that image is not all about money. As a matter of fact, I would propose that it is less about money than other things. But that is a discussion for another time. The website references that I've listed go into some detail about onboarding and enhancing the transition of new employees. It's worth reading. It's worth reading because it's very important, and it's very important to the success of our hiring and recruiting process. So here we are. We have discussed selection processes, including recruiting, assessments, and hiring decisions. Before we change our focus to compensation, there are a few things I would like for you to take with you from this and the previous sessions. Recruiting, selection, and hiring are really all one process when you think about it. One impacts the quality and the effectiveness of the other. For example, poor recruiting certainly leads to poor selection. And poor selection may negate good recruiting. An analysis of what we have, what we need now and in the future, and what is available are all part of the recruiting strategy. And this internal and external analysis of the labor market is part of the strategic plan. We learned that there are significant legal issues connected to the hiring process. We have to be careful. We have discussed and understand what assessments measure and how they work. We discussed several recruiting methods in depth, including the internet, headhunters, outplacement firms, internal recruiting, job fairs, and others. We learned that company brand is important in recruiting, but more important when the job market favors employees. In other words, when unemployment numbers are low. We understand the importance of validity and reliability of assessment tools. We discuss the importance of performance in defining the job for recruiting and selection activities. We spent a great deal of time discussing making hiring decisions and how they are difficult and often based on soft skills rather than on hard, highly observable, and measurable skills. And during the recruiting and hiring process, marketing our company is important, but particularly critical in the latter stages of the selection process when we are considering our finalists. And we've learned that the hiring process doesn't end when the offer is accepted. There is more. This process is an important part of the long-term success of any organization. Staff well and prosper, staff poorly and struggle. It's as simple as that. Remember, I told you this was simple. As I'm sure my examples have demonstrated, I believe the hiring process requires time and energy to reach an end that is beneficial. It's worth the effort, just like anything in life. It's just like marriage. Find a spouse quickly, and you may have a successful marriage, but the chances of success are certainly diminished. Take your time, and your success, although not assured, are dramatically improved. I'm an example of that. My wife and I dated for the better part of 4 years and have been married for nearly 47 years. There may be love at first sight in romance, but there is no love at first sight in recruiting. It's a deliberate, planned, cautious process. For those of you who were surprised that hiring someone is so involved and cautious, I'm glad. I have introduced you to a new concept. For those of you who always thought hiring someone was important and time-consuming, I hope I have introduced some new techniques, understandings, and ideas for your consideration. I mentioned that each of you in your career will establish and gravitate to your own preferences in the staffing process. That is quite true. I only hope that those preferences reflect the proper care and concern I have tried to convey here related to the importance of this critical organizational success process. But remember, once you have them, you must keep them. Let's discuss that part of the success equation now.